Welcome everyone to ACT United's 7th Annual Community Awareness to Action Conference Behind the Veil. My name is Seisha. I am the Director of Outreach and Missions for ACT United. I will be one of your hosts tonight and your Q&A moderator. This year, our conference looks very different because we are offering a virtual webinar series throughout the week. Each webinar addresses a new topic with an expert speaker. Tonight's webinar is At Risk, Individuals and Communities at Risk of Sex Trafficking. And we will hear from 2 speakers and then have 10 minutes for Q&A. Throughout the hour, you can enter your questions in the Q&A chat box below. And now I would like to introduce you to your other host and one of your speakers, Jessica Bartholomew. She is the founder and executive director of ACT United. With 25 years of experience working with children, teens, and at-risk communities in youth outreach, missions work, and as a retired police officer, Jessica brings firsthand information and experience to the issues of child and teen sexual exploitation, abuse, and trafficking. She is the author and lead facilitator of the Youth Aware Teen Exploitation Prevention Program. She also provides community education classes and professional training to equip and engage everyone in creating safe communities for youth. Jessica is an engaging, passionate speaker to both youth and professional audiences who will leave you not just informed of the facts of juvenile sex trafficking, but inspired to take action by her message that united we win. With that said, Jessica, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Seisha, and thank you everyone for joining us virtually at ACT United tonight and for our 7th annual conference, and for those of you who were part of our practice session, because we went live early. So there's the ins and outs of getting ready for the webinar tonight. So this year has had changes for many of us in many ways. And for the first time this year, after 7 conferences, we had changes as well, including our lineup of speakers tonight and who we're going to hear from first. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you our very first speaker, Detective Carter Staaf. Detective Staaf is with the Eden Prairie Police Department's Special Investigations Unit. He has more than 23 years of police experience as a patrol officer, SWAT team leader, patrol sergeant, and originating member of the Special Investigations Unit at the Eden Prairie Police Department. In 2016, Detective Staaf and other investigators from agencies in the Southwest Hennepin County area formed the I-494 Human Trafficking Task Force to combat trafficking in our hotels located near Interstate 494. This team utilizes its investigative strength to attack sex trafficking through victim recovery, law enforcement, and education. He currently works with detectives, prosecutors, and advocates around the Twin Cities metropolitan area in the fight against sex trafficking. Through his work, Detective Staaf has seen firsthand how the signs and indicators of sex trafficking often go unnoticed because our lenses are not focused in the right direction and on the right things. So here to share his expertise from the front lines and his work with us tonight so that hopefully our lenses will be very focused is Detective Carter Staaf.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that introduction. I'm going to share my screen with everybody so that you have the opportunity to see my slide deck. One of the most important things when we are discussing sexual exploitation and sex trafficking is getting an understanding of what the layout looks like for our communities, not just in the metropolitan area or the suburban areas, but also in the rural communities and throughout the state, because this is representative of the way that you'll see trafficking throughout the country even, really. So the first thing I want to show you is I like to start with this map here. So this is pulled off the Polaris website. And if you notice, all of these major metropolitan areas have very hot spots in it. And then you come up to Minnesota here and you look at obviously our metropolitan area, but if you expand this out and you start to look at where the heat is and where trafficking is represented, it's really represented all over. So for those of you who have been around and are at this conference for numerous times, you may have seen this and you may have heard me talk about this a little bit. So I appreciate the fact that you let me back up a little bit and just kind of throw out a little bit more of the roadmap for everyone, because I want to make sure that our listeners and our viewers are understanding that it's really here and it's for real. Give you an idea of the local basics of how it happens, how people are groomed, what does it look like, and in my opinion, what some of our major threats would be, so that you as an individual who are watching this might be able to recognize some of what you're seeing, and then to tie into maybe what Jessica's going to talk about a little later, what you could do when you do see that. So we'll move forward a little bit. To understand this, we have to get into a little bit of the pimpology. So pimpology is terminology that's slang, it's vernacular, potentially offensive, but it's what is still being used today. The idea of pimping is a reality. And if you understand how somebody who's going to be targeting a victim to traffic or to potentially use that individual to sell sex with, you have to understand what psychology they use on their victims in order to figure out how to defend against it, and or at least be aware of it and how it might look if you're trying to just kind of scan the landscape of your own family or society as you're walking through it. So one of the things we have to talk about first is this fraud landscape. I love this slide, and if you've seen me speak before, you know that this is coming. The cracks in here represent the cracks or the fractures that might be in someone's own interpersonal space. This might represent how I view myself, my self-esteem. It might represent where I perceive myself on some social status or some socioeconomic status. It might be representative of the amount of love that I receive. It might be representative of where I fit in society. And if we have these voids, if we have these cracks in our just in our existence, I know I have them too. There's things I'm insecure about, you know, and somebody wants to make me feel better by putting a light skim coat of putty over those cracks, make me feel better, make me more receptive to listening to what they have to say, then I might be willing to follow them a little bit more deeply. And I also might be willing to do things or make compromises that I wouldn't normally make in my life. So this is really the foundation for which I look to an individual. What could be exploited in that individual if they were trying to be, if somebody were going to try and exploit them? And again, the way that skim coat of putty crack covers up those cracks is extra heaping of love that they don't necessarily feel, attention they don't necessarily feel, definitely money that they wouldn't necessarily have access to, a lifestyle they wouldn't have access to, attention that they wouldn't normally get, or feeling part of a community or feeling normalized when they wouldn't necessarily feel normalized anyplace else. So it's all of the things that I think, if we're being good relationship people, we probably do this already. You know, we would probably do this, but not with nefarious activity, intentions behind it. But if you saw someone in your family who was in need of love, you would add extra love. If you saw them who their self-esteem was low, you would add extra love. But when we're not doing that, when we're not taking care of each other, when we're not watching out for those signs, somebody else could, and somebody else could use them. And this fourth one, all right, maybe it's time for me to change this because this is kind of stereotypical and looks like what you might expect to see in a sex trafficking presentation. But force is real. Once somebody has applied that skin coat of putty, once somebody has made that, filled the cracks of that person's void, then that person starts to feel good. They start to want more and more of that. They may want to compromise and make some changes and follow this individual. And if there's a moment where they feel as though they can't continue, then that love or that whatever was there to fill in that void might be forcibly enforced, if you will. It might be a strong coercion. It might be a coercion with threats of violence. It can also be less physical violence and more acts of pulling love away. Or one of the ways, if you think about you would do this, would be if you started to support your victim's family or take care of the victim's mother or whatever, and then now you start to pull away that care that you're providing over there, and let's say it's financial or whatever, that might leverage the victim into doing it, staying in that situation and continuing with it. So this is what everybody thinks that trafficking is that some evil individual out in the middle of the world will sneak in and take your children, and they will just be pushed over into some sex trafficking ring and you'll never see them again. I guess that is true. We have that example out there. But locking your kids down for this particular method is not as efficient as it would be to fill in the voids and the cracks yourself so that they may not be wooed away. This still happens. The taken style stuff, it's a reality. But I'm more concerned about the wooing away and the manipulation away. That, let's go to this point. If I want you to talk to me, I'm not going to put this light in your face and tell me, what did you do? Tell me why you did it. We've all seen this set up in police television shows, right? It's always scripted, and if we want to get the bad guy to confess, we put a light on them, we put them in a room, handcuff them to the table, and we badger them until they say something. That doesn't work, right? That never works. If I want to have a conversation about something with someone as a police officer, and I build rapport with them, and I get them to like me, and I become to be someone who's easy and safe to talk to, there's a higher probability that that person will share the details of whatever criminal enterprise they were involved in with me. That methodology is more similar to what the trafficker, for lack of a better term, will do to the victim or the targeted individual. They will build rapport. They will find a space that's common between them. It might be music, it might be culture, it might be relationships, it might be money, it might be you name it. Whatever it is that they can get their hook into to start to exploit more deeply and to build that relationship to a greater sense of, and give it more steam, more momentum, so that their victim will follow them to ultimately make a compromise. And then once they make that compromise, of course, then they'll make another one, and then make another one, and then fast forward a year, they can't believe where their life has gotten to. So this approach of hard line forcing doesn't really work as much as this approach does, the sugar approach. And I like this view because this is going to tie into more of the landscape that I'm particularly concerned about at this point, and I see more often in the high school environment than I do any place else. Or, this might be potentially the greatest danger that we don't know about, in my opinion, because most of the folks that I've been having hard conversations with have started with what's called a sugar site. Or let me back up here. a sugar site, which would be something where they're told that somebody wants to spend some time with them. It would pay them money to spend time with them. And that's an alluring idea, that if I just spend time with an individual, they'll pay me for that time. And it doesn't always go that way. So this next slide is a guy by the name of Ricky Turner. Ricky Turner was part of an investigation that was run by many different organizations, but primarily it was the East Metro Human Trafficking Task Force that ran this operation. It was the one who prosecuted it in Washington County, and it started off as the day that Backpage got shut down, and everyone was stating that there was this big win. They went out, and the analysts and the investigators in that task force went to look for an active pimp. And that's what started this investigation. Was that day they got onto Ricky Turner. So I want to fast forward to the end of it, because this ties into the Minnetonka area, and it tied into what we would consider out in the suburbs, or what our population in the suburbs would consider something that should have never happened or wouldn't have never happened. Ricky Turner ran a prostitution operation out of a vacation rental, a VRBO, on Minnetonka, in the city of Minnetonka, on Lake Minnetonka. And he ended up running this organization, a very lucrative organization in this area, where he essentially was having prostitutes work out of hotels, but also was bringing them back to this vacation rental to have prostitution sex there. And the day that we went to make this arrest, we found Mr. Turner in a vehicle that had one underage individual in it and another one who had just recently turned 18. And they were kind of at the turn. If you expanded out the investigation and saw into the electronic communication between Turner and his two potential victims, you saw that they were deep into the grooming phase, if not at what we consider the turn, which is that moment when you ask the individual to make a compromise, and then you build off of that compromise. Well, those two young girls were in a car in his driveway when we moved up on him with our investigative group and took him into custody. So I often think about that moment and that day, the turn of events in those two individuals' lives, and obviously the turn of events for Mr. Turner and all those who were involved in his criminal enterprise. The point being is that when we expanded everything out, we found out, well, how did Turner get his hooks into these two young individuals? How did he initially make contact with them? We found out that he had met them at a Chipotle in Wayzata. Two young, under 18 girls that a chance encounter at a Chipotle could have changed their lives significantly. It probably did change their life significantly, but could have made it even far greater if that wouldn't have happened. And it wasn't because he forced them, or the Taken scenario. He drove a cool car. He is a handsome man, and he had an incredible style about him. And these kids were bored. They wanted something interesting and unique in their lives, and he was able to provide that. So I go back to these most dangerous areas as my sugar sites. If you just look at all of these on here, you might see any one of these in your kid's phone or in a juvenile's phone. And what happens is seeking arrangements, probably the most common one, but at least it's the most publicized one. But all of these tend to have some of the same effects to it. But at least for students that I meet in our schools, it starts with a student who tells a story that, hey, I met this guy on this site. He's willing to pay me $300 just to go have coffee with him. And we just sat at Starbucks and we had this coffee, and then an hour later he gave me $300 and I walked away. And that may all be true. but there's a chance that it's not exactly that that's the way the story went. And I've had some experience with a couple of students in our school where I've walked this back to its origin for our area and found out that that's kind of how the story, the legend of the story started. The next individual that did it, it was a coffee meet, but it had a little bit more expectation to it. And eventually that relationship that was just a coffee meet turned into a sexual encounter. And the person still paid for the coffee, but there was sex that was with it, and the individual was underage. And this was an adult that was meeting up with her. And so that individual I was able to communicate a little bit more with, and found out that with multiple dates, exactly 100% of the time, the expectation was that she would have sexual encounter based on the site. And so if you really start to go and talk about this with the students or the kids that I've had contact with, all of them discuss, if not the sexual act, the setup for a future sexual act. And I've had, along with my colleagues in the various different task force, we can all probably recall and regurgitate language that we've seen on sites or seen in people's phones or on these apps that exploit and show how they're about to exploit the individual. And the individual, just because, like I say, they're bored, they need money, they want something interesting in life, are potentially willing to fall for this. And this one comes across, these sugar sites come across as if they're just not that big a deal, because no one wants to tell the story to the next potential victim that they got played, and that it actually was a straight sex site. Or some people think that they're going to go in and they will have sex and they will make some money off of it, but they always think that they're they always think they're the apex predator, or like they're going to go make the money and it's going to be on their terms, and that's not always the case at all. So let's talk about the demand. And one of the things that we notice is that the demand for sex is still there, and it's still as potent as it's ever been. I know some of my colleagues have recently done some operations where even in rural Minnesota, very recently, a demand operation was run targeting those who wish to have sex with underage individuals. And as recently as within the last 2 weeks, there's still a significant population that were arrested for attempting to have sex with kids underage. But the most interesting thing that I want to talk about demand on is what happens to demand during COVID? What happens to sex trafficking during the COVID-19 epidemic or pandemic? Because our group was working a significant case before COVID hit, which involved multiple agencies, a national ring that was bringing in individuals from all around the country to the Minneapolis area. And we found that as we were doing our surveillance and COVID shutdowns were about to intersect, that at one point, prostitution stopped. There was a specific date when prostitution stopped. The people we were watching were all masked up, gloved up. They went to the store. They bought all the accoutrement that we all bought, the hand sanitizers, the you name it, and they hunkered down. And prostitution shut down for an entire 3 weeks during the deepest part of the COVID shutdown. And then it started up again. And planes weren't even flying again, but prostitution was still up and running. And we were starting to watch these individuals thinking, is this a public health? We didn't know enough about COVID at the time. And are we now watching a public health crisis or beyond prostitution? But what was fascinating to me was how Okay, so think of it like this. When we all had an exposure to COVID, we all had to quarantine for several days, right? If we quarantined for 14 days, and we were, your company probably got some COVID money, you probably recovered, right? Well, the prostitution industry wasn't. So just like HR came down for edicts with those of us who were employed, it's almost like the HR industry came down to the prostitution world and said, hey, if you are sick, you can't make money. If you can't make money, then the pimps doesn't get paid. If the pimps don't get paid, then everybody pays, right? So you saw the prostitution world starting to follow CDC guidelines to the nth degree. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating, how prostitution was almost a pandemic proof. It slowed it just a little bit. It dinged it, but it was pandemic proof. And then in the middle of that pandemic came the civil unrest of May, June. And we watched prostitution pierce through the riots and the civil unrest. And I was thinking, the world, we're all thinking, right, the world is kind of collapsing. But here is prostitution just carving its path right through it. And I don't know about you, but that to me was this watershed moment that the economics of this will pierce through just about anything. Because here we are, we're all thinking the apocalypse was kind of coming, and weren't we? I mean, if we didn't, we at least joked about it. And yet here is prostitution, people willing in the face of a pandemic to pay for sex. In the face of potential riots, people were still willing to pay for sex. It was stunning to me. It was absolutely stunning to me. So I guess that's hopefully given us some food for thought about what the landscape looks like. Again, that's what prostitution is. That's how it affects us here in the metro, but it also affects us out in the greater regions. And then I thought the most interesting thing I could share with you guys is our perspective on prostitution in a pandemic and why it cut right across the culture lines, it cut right across the economic lines, and it cut right through any government orders that were brought down. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I guess I'm available for questions if there are any.
All right. Well, thank you, Detective. I am getting us transferred over here for me to begin screen sharing in a second. And please put all your questions in the Q&A. In the Q&A box. Seisha is our moderator tonight, and she is there we go. And she is collecting all those questions right now so that we can spend the last 10 minutes of our webinar addressing efficiently as many of those questions as we can. So right now we are going to transition into a session about action. We always appreciate our speakers, our expert speakers, frontline speakers, the ones that are, all of us are out there in different ways in a direct service of some sort to bring you the most current and relevant information to our communities. And we always appreciate what Detective Staaf brings to our audience. So that leads into my session over the next few minutes before we go to Q&A. And while I pull my screen up to share, I just want to say that this is the foundation of our organization and my passion, and that is how do we translate awareness and information about something like youth, children, teenagers being sexually exploited and trafficked right in our communities. Well, I'm going to hopefully help us translate awareness into some very small, concrete action steps tonight. So I am pulling up my screen share here. Hopefully everybody sees that. You're probably all more savvy at this than me. But translating this, I'm going to do 4 things. I am going to summarize what are the sexual exploitation crimes that we are seeing impacting youth in our communities right now. What are the vulnerabilities or the risk factors that child predators and traffickers target? Importantly, what is the solution or one solution to this problem? And what are the 4 possible action steps that you can take even tonight to help be a part of that solution? So the sexual exploitation crimes that we see happening right now, and detective staff went over some of this for us. One is sexting and sextortion. That is the making, the sending, the sharing, distributing of sexually explicit photos and videos. This is something that is completely off the charts among youth people, and as young as grade schoolers. The youngest we have seen is 2nd grade. But making these photos and sending them, sharing them, is leading to some pretty significant academic, social, mental health, physical health issues. A child or a teenager is not anticipating the repercussions or what happens next when you send that photo. But once that explicit image leaves your hands and it goes to somebody else, that person now has control over that image. And we are seeing youth being threatened and coerced and pressured to make and send even more explicit photos and videos under threat. Threats of extortion for money, threats to meet in person, threats to not break up with me, or I'll send this photo out, or threats that if you don't send me more explicit images, then I am going to put this image out on the internet. I'm going to put it in child pornography out on the dark web. I'll print it and hang it up at school. And because of those threats, it's significant mental health impact on young people. And the second thing we're seeing is sex trafficking. And that's something detective staff talked to us about. And we're still seeing it during COVID and what's going on right now. And just in short, juvenile sex trafficking is the exchange of something of value for a sex act from a person under the age of 18. And something of value could be money, a place to stay. It could be your medications. It could be diapers and formula for a young mother or a young teen father. So something of value is exchanged for a sex act with a person under the age of 18, and that's felony juvenile trafficking. And the other thing that we are seeing in the high schools especially, and we're seeing a lot of peer-to-peer recruitment with this as well, is what detective staff talked about, and that is sugaring or sugar dating, where teens are going on dating sites with the idea that there's an exchange of a date with a person for money, and that they're going to have some relative control over this situation, and it's going to benefit them financially. And then they quickly find out they're not the ones in control, and it is leading to forms of sex trafficking or sexual assault and abuse. So these are the 3 things that we see happening to youth. So who's at risk of sexual exploitation crimes? The youth that we see that have experienced sexual exploitation range in age from infants to young adults, so like our college age. Now, anybody can be trafficked at any age. Our organization works to help elevate awareness and prevention for youth sex trafficking, so that's just what our focus is. And the victims range in age from infants to young adults. And we see this happening to youth in every community, every background, culture, ethnicity, rural, suburban, urban. No community is exempt. And we also make sure to mention that it is also all genders. And the reason why we make a point of letting people know that these are crimes that also happen to our boys or young men, our biological boys, is because historically a lot of our training and our information has been pretty concrete in stating, and we're seeing this change over the last 4 years, which is amazing. But historically, training and awareness on this issue has presented the language that women and girls are victims of sex trafficking, and boys and men are perpetrators or offenders or potential offenders of sex crimes. And the reality is, we know that some traffickers are women, including biological mothers. And we know that any gender and every gender has been impacted by sexual exploitation crimes. In 2016, the Department of Justice helped to fund a study, and it found that 36% of trafficked minors in the United States were cisgender boys or biological boys. So nobody's exempt, no community is exempt, right? So that's important to know with prevention and taking action. We can take action right where we live, our community, our school district, our churches, right? And within our families. But there are some common vulnerabilities that we see. And some of those common vulnerabilities are youth that run away or are missing or homeless or experiencing some sort of shelter or home instability, either by themselves or as a family is experiencing this. If they have parents that are addicted to drugs or involved in drug abuse, we do see trafficking within family systems because of that. History of youth with a history of sexual abuse or some other early childhood sexual trauma. And in particular, when there hasn't been some counseling or some therapy or some progress on the healing journey to help with the healing of some of that, of the trauma, and with reestablishing boundaries, those sexual boundaries and physical boundaries and relationship boundaries that get crossed and can get destroyed. As a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, speaking from experience, those boundaries get stripped. And without some proactive help and care, with somebody helping, walking you through reestablishing those boundaries, when sexual exploitation and those behaviors and control behaviors and sexual behaviors in a relationship get presented to you, if you don't have those boundaries up, it really creates that vulnerability for further exploitation. Involvement, youth that are already involved in the criminal justice system for other reasons, youth that are in foster care. And studies are difficult, statistics are difficult, but we do have some that are available with sex trafficking and with our youth. And one of those things shows that there is a high rate of foster kids that are in the foster system that end up in victims of these crimes or in the life of sex trafficking. So foster care kids, emotional poverty, emotional vulnerabilities, predators and child predators and traffickers. These are the vulnerabilities that they look for as the inroad to establish that first contact, that empathy, that sympathy, that communication. What is your need? I identify that need so I can fill that need as my inroad to building that relationship that is going to lead to control, abuse, and possibly exploitation or trafficking. So with youth, their online behaviors are so important because child predators, not only in person, but significantly are online looking for these risk factors or vulnerabilities. And when they see these emotional cracks, like Detective Staaf calls it, it is absolutely true. They become the one that's going to fill that need to start that online relationship that is really going to go in a very bad and abusive direction. And no prevention education. Survivors, the youth we work with, research, say there's mass agreement that no prevention education is one of the biggest vulnerabilities. Because if I'm a young person and I think sex trafficking is going to start by getting kidnapped out of a parking lot, I'm going to protect myself against that. I'll be on alert, but I'm not going to be alert online. I'm not going to be on alert in my relationships. I'm not going to be on alert to see those red flags or those indicators, those behaviors that are really grooming behaviors leading to secrecy, control, and then abuse or exploitation. So without prevention education, they don't even see what's coming. And because youth are the ones that are often targeted for these crimes, aren't they the ones that need to have the information for themselves as well as the confidence to act on the information that they have? So no prevention education is a vulnerability for any youth anywhere. And as far as at-risk populations go, I tell you what, any kid with a cell phone or a computer that has internet access without prevention education, that is an at-risk population for these crimes. So let's take a look at a recent study when it comes to youth. This was the Minnesota Department of Health added a question about sexual exploitation or sex trafficking to the 2019 student survey. The student survey goes out, I believe it's every 3 years, to students in our Minnesota schools. It's a voluntary basis to take the survey, and they released their findings and results last year. And in our 2019 student survey, the Minnesota Department of Health explicitly states right on their website that a minimum of 5,000 students are a victim of at least one form of sex trafficking in our state. The youth that reported being a victim of at least one form of sex trafficking came from every region in Minnesota. So you're not exempt in the north, you're not exempt, down south or any particular community, that we really saw this happening across our whole state. And it was happening to every gender. And there was no statistical significance difference between rates for biological boys and biological girls. They were reporting being a victim of this form of sexual exploitation, which was sex trafficking, at the same rates. So Detective Staaf touched on this. So if in 2019 we had a minimum of 5,000 youth in our state that had experienced at least one form of sex trafficking already in their life, well, what happened once COVID and civil unrest and all of this broke out in our communities across the nation? So this information isn't just specific to Minnesota, but communities are experiencing these issues right here across our whole nation. And what we saw from reports and from information that's coming in with direct service agencies and our hotline numbers is that sex trafficking, sexual assault, and abuse of minors was actually seeming to increase during COVID and civil unrest. Why is that? I love what the detective said about how the economy of sex trafficking will carve its way through anything. And that's what they are seeing, that's what we are seeing. And what is one of the reasons for that? Well, when we look at vulnerabilities, and when we know what puts kids at risk and what vulnerabilities are that are targeted by child predators and traffickers, COVID and what's happening has increased those vulnerabilities. So now we have kids that are experiencing mental health concerns, isolation, loneliness, and they're online more than ever. 4,500% increase of online activity since everything went to distance learning a year ago. So we have kids with increased vulnerabilities, communities at increased vulnerabilities because of some economic hardship. So we increase your vulnerabilities, and then we take you out of those systems that are kind of a natural support where other trusted adults may be to see something and are the ones that may intervene or notice differences in behaviors. So they're out of school, out of church, out of sports. So they're away from the other eyes and ears that parents have or that youth have to notice when something's changed or they need help. And what's happening has made increased the mistrust of law enforcement and fear. So increased vulnerabilities, economic hardship, you are pulled out of your regular and other community support systems, and you're afraid of law enforcement, the very phone number, the very contact you could possibly have if something is happening. And that's why we're seeing an increase. And I'll tell you, one of our colleagues, who's an executive director of Urban Ventures in Minneapolis, he did some prison time for pimping and for sex trafficking a couple of decades ago, and has had a massive life turnaround and is now working in the community in a very fabulous way. But he'll tell you the best hole you can create and the best way you can help a pimp is to make people afraid of the police, because we say the exact same thing. So if you distract the police, you use up resources, and you make people afraid, then that creates the open door of opportunity for us. Because he said, these are his words, that's the same thing that they say, that the police aren't going to believe you, they're not going to help you, nobody's there to help you, you're the one going to jail. So by creating fear of those people and agencies that are in place to actually protect you is furthering isolation and victimization. So a couple of facts statistically, because I don't want to say it's increasing and not tell you why we know that, right? We saw an increase in online child sexual abuse and pornography, 106% increase the first month that shelter in place happened last year. The National Sexual Assault Hotline received more phone calls from youth last year than ever in hotline history. And 79% of those youth said, I'm sheltered in place with my perpetrator, with my trafficker. So we saw an increase because of these community factors. So the three things that are impacting youth in our communities, what makes them vulnerable or at risk? So what is the solution? There are a couple of different things that we can do to attack this in a proactive and preventative way, like demand stings and attacking it from what law enforcement does on that end. But when it comes to youth, there is complete agreement in the anti-trafficking industry from the Minnesota Department of Health that youth prevention education is how we combat juvenile sex trafficking and exploitation. When they did their survey, they said, based on the results and what we have found, we have an opportunity. What is clear from the research is our opportunity is this: prevention education in the schools, because the kids that filled out the survey were in the schools. The kids that reported being a victim of at least one form of sex trafficking are in our schools. That creates opportunity for prevention education to reach youth. And survivors and survivor surveys say prevention education. I had no idea what trafficking looked like, what it was, how it happened. Because I wasn't kidnapped. I didn't know what grooming was. I didn't know that those behaviors and those things that were said to me, or the way this person was acting with me, I had no idea that that was a grooming behavior. If I would have known the red flags, if I would have known the signs, and if I would have had resources and things in my life, in my back pocket, then maybe I would have made a different decision. Maybe I would have seen it coming and been able to avoid that kind of harm in my life. And in the middle here, this graphic here, early intervention to avoid sex trading in Minnesota. This was a study done in 2012, which was a cost-benefit analysis, taking a look at what do we need to do and what is the most efficient and effective thing to do to avoid, or I would say prevent, sex trafficking of our juveniles. And the analysis found this, that it's prevention, education to our youth. And the cost analysis was for every $1 we invest in prevention, it saves us $34 of restorative care. So even financially, it's an investment that is worth making. And although there is agreement across all the, from the Minnesota Department of Health to UROC and our research and our university research and frontline people working in direct service, although all of us agree that prevention education is what needs to happen, it is the least funded and it is the least implemented strategy. So we have the solution. I'm just going to say it's time that we don't wait, and it's time that we implement our strategy. So, of course, that's a lead-in, but good news, right? That's what we do at ACT United. And there's other programs that are available. The reason why we developed this program is because it was going to do 3 very important things. It was going to educate our youth, the prevention education, and then it was going to equip them with small group breakouts and a chance for them to do Q&A and to learn more. And then we have a leadership track, because it's really moving learners to leaders that is going to multiply your prevention impact. When youth have the information, when they have resources, when they know who the other trusted adults are in the community, then they are better able and better equipped to make those healthy decisions for themselves, but they also become the voice and the advocates to their peers. And those are the stories that just throw gasoline on my fire for this, because when another youth learns and leads and then has an opportunity to be that voice at school, at church, and in their community, a youth voice is a powerful voice to their generation and to their peer group. So we have a youth aware program that's in schools and in churches. We've reached thousands of youth over the last 4 years. We have testimonials on our website. So we do have a tool to help you out if you are interested. So that's what's happening. That's the vulnerabilities. And there is a solution. There is agreement that prevention education to our youth is a powerful way to combat sex trafficking from happening in the first place. So what are 4 ways, 4 small concrete action steps for you to consider to take action today? Number 1, youth prevention education. Learn about our program, learn about a different program, but you can go to our website, go to our youth programs page and learn what it's about. Advocate to get prevention education in your schools or in your church youth group. We have testimonials on our website too. We've been doing this for 4 years. We have tremendous feedback and powerful stories of prevention as well as intervention when kids come forward during our programs to get help. So youth prevention education. Maybe you want to donate specifically to that cause. We are only able to continue these youth programs. We have no government funding. It's pretty knowledgeable, I guess, in our industry that a lot of government funding goes to the restorative end because it's so needed, and we need to even increase that end of things. But until that dollar also goes into prevention, we are not going to get ahead of it and end it before it happens. So please consider a donation just for youth programs. Number 2, if we know foster kids, right, are vulnerable or at risk to sex trafficking, then let's do something to help kids in foster care. And we really want to direct you to one of our partner organizations called the Real Hope Project. We met them, we love them, they're amazing. If you want to know how you can help make that connection between Minnesota's waiting kids and their forever family by being a part of helping Real Hope Project, please go to their website at realhopeproject.org. Number 3, quality time and talks with your kids. Healthy conversations, open, honest, non-judgmental conversations about this kind of stuff, about healthy relationships, about online safety. If you want to go to our website or to our YouTube channel at Act United, we have videos that could be really great conversation starters for the family or between you and your kids or you and your teen. We have stuff for different ages. So have those conversations to learn together. And number 4, please consider a donation or becoming a monthly partner of Act United. There's 3 different ways to give. Please help us continue to bring programs like this, which is information and education and resources to community members and professionals, to parents, and removing cost barriers so that anyone and everyone is able to get this information. And also it funds, of course, our youth programs. So please consider a donation. Never underestimate financial partnership, because we can reach so many kids because of individual donors, churches, families, and foundations. So 4 concrete steps that maybe you want to consider tonight. Hopefully I talked really fast. Ooh, not fast enough. So I am going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Seisha to get us rolling on some Q&A time here. So I apologize for going over my time. I get passionate and crazy. So
Thank you, Jessica.
Carter, there we go. Sorry.
All right, my first question I'm going to give to Detective Staaf. To what extent is pornography driving the demand for young people?
Thanks, Seisha. I've been looking at this question and thinking about it for quite a bit here. One of the things that I've noticed in each one of the demand operations that I've been a part of is that there seems to be a moment when we connect with during the interview with the sex buyer. And if they're willing to talk with me, we kind of explain, like, how did we get to this today? When did this happen? And almost to a person, it seems like we've gone through the internet. The moment where pornography has transitioned from just something salacious on that they can view at any time to that next step, that jump off point. They've been so desensitized to what they're viewing on the screen that now it has to be taken to this next level. So if you ask me, do I think it has an impact? In my experience dealing with the sex buyers and the ones who are willing to talk, it almost always has a correlation to it.
Thank you. And the next question I'll give to Jessica. When working with young people who are in denial that they are being trafficked, like they view it as dating adult men, it's their choice and they are benefiting from it, what are questions that might help these young people develop some insight into what is really going on? And just making sure that youth don't feel guilty or that their perspective isn't valued in those difficult conversations with youth.
Yeah, that was a long one, and my brain went a couple different directions. You know, one is just good old basic communication. To them, it is a relationship. To them, it might be a relationship. They may not be viewing that as sex trafficking, this big word that means something different to them. This could be domestic violence to them. This could be a relationship with somebody that they love. This could be a relationship, oftentimes they feel like, okay, well, now it's gone south. It is different than what I thought. But they take on a level of responsibility and shame around it. So being aware that it's a little bit more than denial, it really does have more of an emotional can have more of an emotional context to it, and approaching the conversation that way, without judgment. I think when we know something's bad, we try to educate on why it's bad. And the first step to kind of open up dialogue might be, what's your experience in this relationship? How's it going? Is there benefits to this relationship? Help them start unpacking their thoughts around this. Because then maybe you can help them get to the answer that we all know is there. Another thing that I suggest between parents and youth is to watch one of our informational videos together, or a different video somewhere. We have a YouTube channel that has informational webinars and training and sessions on sugar dating, on sex trafficking, on online sexting and sextortion. Watch together, learn together, and then open up dialogue about that together. And remember, we're not going to beat around the bush about the danger level of this, but education is the only way I can think to put it, like education being the context for that conversation, to try to help lead them to that answer without beating around the bush. I learned about this. Here's what I heard happens. Here's what I learned about it. And so we don't want to sugarcoat anything, but more of an open dialogue to at least start with. And I'll tell you this is, I tell as many families as I can about this. It is odd to me. I hate it. I don't like it. But the number one reason kids tell us they're not telling their parents to get help is they're afraid they're going to lose their phone. They're putting up with abuse. They're putting up with exploitation, fear, and suffering, and not telling. And one of the reasons is they're afraid of losing their phone or getting grounded. And because it's not necessarily speaking to the phone, it's speaking to their world, which is connection, communication, and friendship. So not a punitive model of discussion, but more I'm here to protect you, I want you safe model of discussion to enter into that.
Thank you. I know we're over time, but there's a couple more questions, maybe
Let's
two
do
more.
2 questions, and it's all my fault. I went longer than 20. So it's all my fault. 2 more questions, and then I'll close us out, and we certainly can get to your questions in a different format if we don't do it live right now.
So Detective Staaf, the next question, how are real trafficking issues warped by fake trafficking conspiracies like QAnon or Anon?
Oh, I think that's left up to the individual's perception of that. Here, I keep everything on Main Street, right? When I deal with people, and it's going to take me a long ways to get off of Main Street with things. QAnon and all the other quote, I'll call them distractions from it, take us away from the centralized issue that sex trafficking, it's not the boogeyman, it's not monsters, it's not any, it's not that narrative. If that narrative brings a little attention to the light and then it drives somebody to learn something more, and then they kind of hit organizations and events like this, and we can redirect them into kind of what the reality and the truth is that we're seeing in their community. Hey, that's a venue that gets to some productive discussion. It's not my first choice towards it. Let's just, stay with the basic issues. Is that the real predator is out there, not in the form of the boogeyman. The real predator that's out there is, linking back to this porn analogy, they've kind of overstimulated their appetite, and now they're going to push into the next level and be a sugar daddy and try and see if they can get their sexual appetite satisfied that way. They are going to try and woo and manipulate a younger person into wanting to be with them and for their sexual appetite. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know how it warps the message. I just know that it's. I look at it as like, okay, that's it. If it's a pointer that gets to here, okay, fine, whatever. But the main thing is that it doesn't change how we're going to affect change on the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Jessica, as a high school teacher in a large public school, what could you as a teacher be looking for signs of youth being trafficked or exploited?
Yeah, kind of depending upon your connection to youth, there may be different things that you see. Like if you train a hotel versus law enforcement on a traffic stop at 3 a.m. versus a teacher at 9 o'clock in the morning. There's a couple of different things to look for, but there are some things that are common and going to be there. As a teacher, you usually have already had some sort of relationship or observance with this student. Maybe they've been in class for maybe a couple of weeks, or maybe, all year or a couple of years. So one of the things you can look for is a pretty significant change in behavior. Their friends will also notice this. Kids that I can think of, one kid that really did a 180, but was very involved, very engaged, very good grades, loved learning, did after school activities, and all of that. I wouldn't call it a slow dwindle. I would say within about 2 weeks, all connection was gone and grades were slipping. You might see differences in just kind of that personality type behavior. Used to be outgoing, now is withdrawn. Used to hang out with friends, raise hand to answer questions, now is completely disengaged. You might see paranoid with the phone, paranoid with all their communications and contacts, or who's walking in the room. You may have a kid that starts dressing differently, but you want to have that in context with a couple other things, because teenagers can change for other reasons too, but it's definitely something to pay attention to. Money and expensive items. For our guys, sometimes new shoes or very expensive shoes that are really outside the realm of what their financial situation to be as a family. For young ladies, or for other genders too, it could be the flashy purses all of a sudden, or expensive new hairstyles and nails. Tired in class, unexcused absences, unexcused tardies. One of the kids from one of my cases had a pretty good pattern of always being in school, except Monday morning was 2 hours late consistently, because she was being trafficked on the weekends and then dropped off at school Monday morning. People that are picking up kids from school. Normally they take the bus, usually they take the bus, or even usually if they don't, who's picking them up from school? If you're one of those outside, sidewalk people, who are they getting in the car with and driving away with? So changes in behavior, things that are inconsistent with their financial means, tardy, late, talking about sexual things a lot, paranoid with the phone.
All right, well, I think that is all for questions.
All right. So I'm going to close us out, and I just want to say sorry for going over time and looking at our participants. I mean, you all just hung in there really well. So thank you for joining us tonight. We hope this gave you some really good information, as well as some action steps that you can take, concrete steps that you can take. If you had questions that did not get answered, please reach out to us through the website or through email at connect.actunited@gmail.com to learn more about youth programs or other training programs for your staff or for your business. Please go to our website and see all the different training programs that we have available. And you'll be receiving a survey via email after this webinar. Please fill it out because it helps us help you better. And thank you to our speaker, Detective Staaf. Thank you to Seisha, our Q&A moderator. And thank you to our sponsors, Running for Justice in Elk River, Minnesota, Dawn Peterson, Realtor with EXP in Farmington, Minnesota. Thank you to all of you, and we hope to see you tomorrow and Saturday for our next topics in this webinar series and our speakers. So stay connected with us, be a part of the conversation, be a part of action, and follow us on our YouTube channel, Facebook, and we're on Instagram at ActUnitedMN. So thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Have a great night. Hope to see you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.